these fires are mostly spreading out of control. We still got a long way to go, as we're about to hear from the governor and others. And while the winds have died down for the time, we expect they'll remain a threat until early next week. So we're going to keep working 24/7 to support state and local officials to fully stop these fires as soon as possible. Next, we're going to make sure California has every possible resource to fight these fires and help survivors. As soon as the fire started, I approved the Fire Management Assistance Grants, which is a fancy phrase for saying the grants to cover the cost of firefighting federally, and the gear, equipment, capabilities like search and rescue. Then I immediately approved at the governor's request a major disaster declaration, which will pay for things like debris removal, temporary lodging, and first responder overtime pay. Both of these, the grants and the declaration, usually cover 75% of the state's cost. But yesterday I directed the federal government will cover 100% of the state cost for 180 days. I also announced FEMA has turned on its Critical Needs Assistance Program. This program gives one-time payment of $750 to survivors so they can quickly purchase critical items like water, formula, gasoline, and prescription drugs. Survivors should go to disasterassistance.gov or call 1-800-621-3362. We can't help you if we don't know you need the help. So call disasterassistance.gov, contact or call 1-800-621-3362. And I want to be clear, this is not the only aid the survivors can request from FEMA. More programs are going to be available through the disaster declaration, but this assistance that survivors can get now and get it fast. We're also helping the state and local law enforcement personnel keep people safe. I've offered Governor Newsom additional support on that front too. For example, the Defense Department, military personnel can help direct traffic, evacuate people where traffic lights have been destroyed. Finally, I want to thank all the first responders. And I often say, God made man, then he made a few firefighters. And these are men and women. The firefighters in Los Angeles are proof of that. The scope, the scale, and the erratic movements of these fires is truly unprecedented. I mean, it's truly unprecedented. And but day after day, these firefighters have been pulling 24-hour shifts, rushing the flames with hurricane-force winds as well, to rescue people, to evacuate neighborhoods, and put these fires out. Now I speak for the American people when I say, we owe you, we're with you, and we're going to make sure you get every resource you need. I want to turn it over to the Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you've said, what we have been witnessing is truly mass devastation. And whether we are talking about Sylmar to the Palisades to Altadena, it's important to know that we're talking about neighborhoods of people who, in many cases, I think about Altadena, these homes have been in these families for generations. And in many of these homes, it is a multi-generational family that lives there. Also, understand that in a lot of these neighborhoods, the folks who live there also work in that neighborhood, which means they've lost their home and their livelihood. So the devastation that we are looking at is multi-generational and is going to linger for quite some time. And the work under the President's leadership that we are doing through the federal government to provide aid in every way to the governor, to the mayor, to local police and fire is critically important, and we are doing it with a sense of urgency. I also would mention that not only are firefighters out there working around the clock, some of whom, sadly more than a few, who have lost their own homes in the fire, but so too with LAPD police officers who are working around the clock, and there are at least a dozen who have also lost their own homes to the fire. So there is a real human story that is associated with the mass devastation that we are seeing, and everything that we can do to support, we will do. Also understanding there are moments where we should find optimism in the heroism of people who are taking in strangers, taking in friends, providing shelter to evacuees, people looking out for each other, regardless of where they come from or who they voted for. They're looking out for each other and showing the best of the American spirit in a moment of crisis.
In addition to that, I want to point out that this is not going to be over even when all the fires are out. It's just going to be beginning. And the change in insurance policy in California for these modest homes as well as these very expensive homes and businesses. So we're going to be around a long while ago to help the federal government and the mayor as well. So, but why don't I yield to you, Governor, for any comments you have to make, bring us up to date.
I appreciate it, Mr. President and Madam Vice President. Let me just pick up on the spirit of your comments, but first with just deep gratitude to both of you for being so solicitous, so supportive, hand in glove in this operation. There's simply not an ask that hasn't been met. The major disaster declaration, Mr. President, was a game changer. In fact, you were able to do that within 36 hours. I don't know if there's another precedent in American history for disaster that was in the making, was unfolding, and for you to be there in real time and prescient as well. And it turns out that we're going to need all of that support. And the fact that you were able to provide 100% is just tremendous relief on the FBAG side and other disaster relief side. And I think the big focus now, to your point, and appreciate the recognition of some progress last night, the winds were favorable. We were able to address some of the perimeter issues. Again, it's been focused about life, property, and perimeter. But the perimeter progress was real because we were able to get fixed wing and helicopters up last night. We had a new fire start, 5 fires that we're actively battling as we speak. The 2 large ones you've highlighted, the 8% and 3% contained. But we're able to, these guys just did an amazing job. We had this fire, Kenneth Fire, that could have been one of the bigger headlines today. And these guys were able to knock that down. It was heroic. I flew around it to see the dozers, the hand crews, our rattlesnake crews and the National Guard, the mutual aid system. Mr. President, 175 engines from across this country, from New Mexico and Oregon and Washington State, Utah, Idaho. Men and women coming out here regardless of their differences, in the spirit of what the Vice President said, working together in the spirit that defines the best of all of us. And so just with deep gratitude to you, your team. We had the National Guard out last night. We had 43 key posts that they were working, 855 National Guard men and women. We're stationing additional National Guard men and women to the extent we need it. We've surged all the assets. We drew down from all over the state and obviously now increasingly across the country. I want to also highlight, because I think it's incredibly important, we have 150,000 people still under mandatory evacuation orders. These fires are not out, though today we're going to make a lot of progress and continue to increase these containment numbers. But it is important, and I cannot impress upon you more how happy I was here. Mr. President, you say disasterassistance.gov. People are now naturally calling. There's tremendous anxiety out there around getting immediate assistance. The reality of this is starting to come. The clarity as the smoke begins to move and daylight, people are starting to understand the magnitude. I thought I never would see anything like the Tubbs fire, then the Camp Fire. This is up there. This will be one of the most destructive fires. I mean, some property damage, perhaps in the history of the country, but certainly in terms of scale and scope, 10,000+ structures already identified, 10 people we fear have lost their lives, likelihood of more. The magnitude of this is pretty profound. And in closing, I appreciate, Madam Vice President, you bringing up Altadena as well. I was there yesterday, saw a middle school. It's a beautiful middle school burning down. Lifestyles, places, tradition, kids, families, memories, communities completely torn asunder. It's not just a home. It's their lives and their livelihoods. These businesses, community centers. I can't tell you how many churches burned down. And so we had these hurricane force winds, the likes of which we've never imagined in our lifetime. 99+ mile-an-hour gusts. There was no helicopters that can go up in those gusts and those wind shears. But we had thousands and thousands of men and women that did everything in their power to hold the line. And so hats off to the first responders. And in closing, hats off to those neighbors that are stepping up, these self-organizing communities that are coming together in the spirit of what makes us great. The spirit of neighbor to neighbor, to being there for each other. And final words, I ask you, we've got to deal with this misinformation. There were hurricane force winds of mis and disinformation lies. People want to divide this country, and we're going to have to address that as well. And it breaks my heart as people are suffering and struggling that we're up against those hurricane forces as well. And that's just a point of personal privilege that I share that with you, because it infects real people that are out there, people I meet every single day, people the mayor's been meeting with, and they're having conversations that are not the typical conversations you'd have at this time, and you wonder where this stuff comes from. And it's very damaging as well. But we're here to get the job done, to be here for folks, to focus, yes, on this mitigation, and then absolutely recovery in record time. With your support, we're going to be able to do that. With FEMA's support, we're going to get people back on their feet. We're going to rebuild this remarkable community, and we're going to come back. I know it's rote and cliche. It's just a fact. We're going to come back stronger because we're all in this together. And we're in this together because we have a leader in the Oval Office right now, Mr. President Joe Biden, an American president, being there for the American people at a time of critical need. And I cannot impress upon you personally, on behalf of 40 million Americans that live in the great state of California, how proud we are of you, the Vice President, and your leadership.
Well, Go, thank you. That's why I think it's so important. We speak plainly to the American people and let them know what we can and can't do. For example, those churches that get burned down you talked about, those public schools, the federal government will pay to rebuild those. So we have to let people know that there are things that are going to be coming that we've declared in this disaster relief legislation and others that are going to be available. Because I think people say, okay, I'm out, but God, what happens now? But we're not leaving. We're not leaving until we get it done. Karen, Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President and Madam Vice President. I just can't emphasize enough how important your support and involvement has been, and how in the midst of such incredible devastation and tragedy, that it has been comforting to know that you have been accessible. Again, the governor certainly mentioned the fact that you moved so quickly in response to the emergency declaration, the idea of 100% reimbursement, and we have made it clear to folks that that is not the norm, but that is what leadership does in response to such a devastating event. And the governor mentioned, and let me just repeat, hurricane strength wind without the rain. And that has led to such amazing devastation in terms of the Palisades fire and some of the other fires. I think it is important to acknowledge the success going on where there have been evacuation orders that have been canceled and people are going back to certain neighborhoods. Fires have been extinguished in several neighborhoods, Pacoima, Hollywood, Studio City, where people were told they had to evacuate, and those evacuation orders have been rescinded. And as our first responders are out there putting their lives on the line, as the Vice President mentioned, they've been experiencing the losses as well as the city and the county workforces. We have a number of our employees who have had to evacuate while responding. Their families have had to evacuate, or they've had the personal loss of their homes, their places to worship, their schools, or their businesses. But Los Angeles, the region, we are going to recover. We're going to recover, and we're going to rebuild, and we're going to rebuild better. One of the biggest challenges that is facing us, and I also know that it is a national situation, is insurance. And so today I'm here at the County Hall of Administration. We do 2 press conferences a day, one in the county, one in the city. And we had our state insurance commissioner here. We do have a state plan, but that state plan certainly needs to be increased. He talked about introducing emergency legislation to respond to some of the ways we need to strengthen our system. So many of the homes in the area, especially in the Palisades area, had their insurance canceled a year or so ago. And he talked about how he wanted to have a moratorium. He was going to use the power of his office to have a moratorium that said that no policies can be canceled even if your home was not damaged. If you're in the area and everybody around you burnt down, but your home was not damaged, that your policy cannot be canceled. So we have mobilized the philanthropic community. The philanthropic community is already setting up funds to assist, but we are also convening, and the city is taking the lead here in the rebuilding effort. And we're going to expedite rebuilding. It brings back a lot of memories for me in 1992 when we experienced massive civil unrest. And we were able to get the majority of Los Angeles rebuilt quickly by coming together and suspending, waiving rules, getting past bureaucracy. If your home was devastated in a fire, there's no reason for you to have to go all the way back through the permitting process. So while we are saving lives, preventing further destruction, saving homes, saving businesses, dealing with the emergency at hand, we also have our eyes on the future and are preparing to put forward policies, executive directives next week that would address how we bring our city back together and how we expedite the rebuilding. And so, again, let me just end by saying that, your leadership period over the last several years has just been outstanding. Mr. President, Madam Vice President, who's in Angelino, we know that when I spoke with you yesterday, you mentioned that you had to evacuate. You weren't going to mention yourself, but I asked you. And you mentioned that you had to evacuate from your home here while you were in Washington, D.C. And I just want to commend your outstanding leadership and let you know how the residents of Los Angeles are so deeply grateful.
Karen, one of the things I've found in my experience in dealing with disasters is similar, not as devastating. This is people take a look and the immediate help and they're satisfied, they're happy, but they look down the road and say, my God, look at downtown, it's gone. Look at how we're going to do this. We're going to need the United States Congress to follow up with appropriations to help provide for significant help for our fellow Americans who need this help to pay for these programs that we have, because a lot more is going to be happening. And now yield to a woman who's an expert in all this. She and I have traveled more states, flying over fires for the last 4 years, and we literally observed from the air or on the ground more areas burned to the ground from Arizona all the way up to Idaho than the entire state of Maryland, if you took it all, to the ground. And so we're used to this, but nothing like the concentration that's here. This is profound. And so we got the best person we could. Go ahead, Diana.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. President, Madam Vice President. I mean, you and I, sir, have traveled many different disasters, and I can say from what I've seen here yesterday that this is certainly one of the most destructive that you and I have had to deal with during our time here. I had a chance yesterday to talk with the governor and the mayor to hear some of their immediate concerns, but mostly to start to talk about what this recovery is going to look like. I had an opportunity to get briefings from the incident command posts, both at the Palisades fire as well as the Eaton fire. And Madam Vice President, I had a chance to drive through Altadena and see just what the heart of this community is by hearing from the local officials and just witness the amount of loss that they are experiencing and going through. I mean, in addition to the thousands of structures that we hear about that are gone, many of those homes an entire small business district, a booming business district in Altadena that has just been burnt to the ground. Churches and schools and other public facilities that are just gone. And so this is going to be a very complex recovery. But I know that when we all come together and work together through all of our federal partners and bringing in our nonprofit and our private sector partners, that we are going to get through this. And your approval, sir, of the 100% for the debris removal and the emergency protective measures for 180 days is really going to be a game changer in helping to make sure that this recovery gets started off on the right foot. And the major disaster declaration itself is going to do so much. So many people, as you heard, are evacuated.